Hey, welcome along to our session. I see a number of faces that I recognise in the audience, so thanks for coming to listen to us talk today. We're going to talk to you about how to accelerate your hybrid exchange migration. We're going to tell you about our journey at Spark and how we accelerated and got going faster than we would have previously done. We hope you've come to the right room today. We're going to talk about the things that can slow you down and the technical things that you need to consider doing differently to speed you up. We're not talking about how to implement Exchange 2013. What we are talking about is how you can go faster doing it, and we'll give you some tips and a demo or two about things that helped us getting there. So the agenda today, we'll introduce ourselves, tell you about who we are and why we are qualified to talk about this. We're going to talk about the problems that we faced using traditional waterfall project methods. We're going to talk about the solutions that we used using Agile, and give you some tech tips. And then we're going to give you a chance to ask us some questions that maybe we haven't answered during our talk. So, I'm GD Taylor. I'm currently the Manager of End User Compute Infrastructure at Spark. Over my career, I've worked on both sides of project delivery and BAU operational support. I've worked for media companies, local government, multinational outsourced companies, casino, a well-known airline. I've seen the same challenges over and over again in both implementing projects and then supporting the things that projects deliver. I was originally hired at Spark as an architect with a focus on Microsoft technologies, and I took on the delivery of Office 365 at Spark. I did the high-level technical design for all of the infrastructure bits in Office 365, but particularly Exchange. And then I did a whole bunch of business analysis, and I worked with the business to get a bunch of the prerequisite stuff done, like we turned off public folders on Exchange, deleted all that content, made our migration easier. So hopefully this gives you an idea of why I can talk about doing things differently.
Hi, I'm Kate Paulin. I've been a support engineer at Spark for the last 5 years. My main responsibility is in looking after the corporate email systems, and I was part of the team that did the Exchange hybrid deployment that we're going to be talking about today.
Cool. So we really want you to know, and the one thing to take away from this is that it really is possible and you really can deploy hybrid Exchange rapidly. So let's talk about the problems that we had. Implementing hybrid Exchange at Spark had specific challenges that we needed to solve. I don't for 1 minute think they're unique. As I said before, I've seen the same things across every company I've ever worked for. However, they might not be exactly the same challenges that you face, and the solutions that work for us may not work for you. But what we want to do today is hopefully give you a bit of a springboard that opens possibilities for you to think about different ways of approaching your next project, different ways of doing things that might help you to go fast. So our problem, when I started at Spark in 2012 and started working on getting us onto Office 365, was the inertia that we had. It's really hard to get momentum to get Exchange upgraded in a big organisation like we were. The operations teams were scared of getting something they couldn't support, and Spark was running a really traditional waterfall model that required multiple levels of technical approval and business approval to make it work. We were running Exchange 2007, and we had that spread across 2 data centres with some load balancing in each DC. We had a zero growth policy on storage from a previous project, so the bulk of the company was stuck with really small mailboxes. It was a pretty standard Exchange implementation, ActiveSync, webmail, all those other Exchange 2007 services. We were running a separate set of email hygiene appliances, and we had F5 load balancers in the mix. This infrastructure was supporting approximately 14,000 mailboxes. So we knew that moving to Office 365 was where we needed to go as a company. The cost of storage alone made moving to bigger mailboxes that everyone needed and wanted attractive. Originally, I planned to move between 95 and 99% of our mailboxes to the cloud, leaving only the few that either couldn't move or were too sensitive to go to Office 365. When we actually got to discovering who we could move to the cloud, we concluded that there were both compliance and security reasons that meant we had to keep over 1,000 mailboxes with data sovereignty and on-premise. And so that meant we were fully into the realm of a complete hybrid solution and not just one token exchange server for a migration. It needed to be fully resilient, load balanced, and on-premise and in the cloud. So let's talk about Spark's traditional approach to projects. Spark, when I arrived in 2012, was running a very traditional waterfall model. For those of you who don't have any idea what I'm talking about, the waterfall model is defined as a sequential, non-iterative design process where progress is seen as steadily flowing downwards like a waterfall through each project phase. So what did waterfall look like for us? Do an estimate of how much it's going to cost. Write a business case, get the business case approved. Write a high-level requirements document, and from the high-level requirements, a high-level design. Get that approved, stop, write another business case, get the approvals on the funding, write a detailed design and detailed requirements, show how the detailed design met the requirements. Get approvals for that, write another business case, find a project manager, establish a project team to deliver it, work through that whole project implementation. Finally, when the work's all done and it's all documented, shut the project down, hand it over to operations and run away screaming. So what are the problems with waterfall for us? Waterfall takes a lot of time. It's critical that you have all the right artifacts, like requirements documents, written correctly and approved by everyone, because the project scope is tied really rigidly to delivering those requirements. Waterfall is quite expensive because you spend a lot of time estimating, getting approvals, writing business cases, doing justifications before you can move on to the next step. You need teams of people to make sure that the process is followed properly and all the requirements are met. This adds up to projects that aren't cheap to finish. And last of all, when you run a waterfall project, you need a dedicated team of people. That's typically project engineers, project managers, business analysts, change managers. There's a lot of time involved in delivering a project. There's a lot of dedication that goes into it, and that typically means that your BAU operations teams can't spare any resources to work on a project at this sort of scale in an enterprise. So the project comes along, and the PM wants to finish on time and on budget. In order to do this, there's a project scope agreed from the requirements documents, and it's all tied up, tight as. The project teams are all under pressure to deliver a good quality project on time and on budget. There's a real pressure not to let any scope creep get in that'll upset those timelines or budgets. Documentation is typically minimal, although the teams in the project are experts at what they're doing, because normally the project documentation happens at the very end before it's handed to operations. And all this means that more often than not, when the project's complete and handed over to the operations teams to support it, they feel a lot like they've been given a dead cat. So everyone loves it in operations when a project turns up and hands you a dead cat and says, "This is a purebred cat, it's awesome. Now all you operations guys have to do is feed it and water it." The reality is that a dead cat is not very responsive. It typically smells really bad, and it's generally a very unsatisfying experience spending time with a dead cat, even if it happens to be a purebred cat. And also operations is typically left waiting for someone to work out that it's dead, but nobody actually wants to admit that. So after 3 years of planning, Spark didn't have any answers from the business about what the rules were for Office 365. We knew that there were some mailboxes that we couldn't move to the cloud, but we didn't have any clarity on who or why or where those were. We didn't have a project beyond a high-level design and high-level requirements documents that I'd written. The operations staff sat waiting for funding so that they could begin the process of doing things like applying the latest cumulative updates to be ready for an upgrade, and the AD guys wanted to fix the UPNs up so we were ready to go. But above all, What we didn't have was any guarantees that we could complete a successful migration project to a hybrid environment within the budget, within the timeframes that Spark needed. So what do you do at this point? You stop. So I want you to have a think about your own IT experiences of projects or being handed projects if you're in operations. Are there any parallels with what I've just talked about? Typically this is really big enterprise, right? But not everyone's at that same scale, but I'm sure you've all seen similar things. I'm not going to get you to put your hands up, but what I want you to do is turn to the person next to you and just have a quick conversation about whether our experience rings true for you guys and whether you can see that you've had similar problems with inertia in your projects. Yep, cool, okay. So, what did Spark do to stop this inertia and make a thing? As a company, much higher levels up than me, there was a huge decision made to move away from the inertia of waterfall projects. Spark knew as a company that if we were going to move faster and be more adaptive and stay competitive in the market we were in, that we had to find different ways of doing it. And so we decided as a company to adopt Agile internally. And I picked up that methodology and said I can apply this to my infrastructure teams even though it's a software development framework, and we can make it work for us. So what does Agile look like for Spark? Small teams work Agile, right? So you just need a few people. You don't want to overcomplicate it with project managers and change controllers and stuff, just a dedicated small group. You work on a minimum viable solution. So that could be something like a document, a piece of infrastructure, or a process, right? That helps you get a little bit further on. It's iterative and it's incremental. So you work in small iterations and you get better each iteration. So that doesn't mean you have to strive for perfection straight out of the gate. You learn fast and you improve. You work things out on the fly. You're not tied to a fixed scope, so you can flex and move around things that come up as you go. And that means you're able to respond to change. So you can be quite adaptive as you start going and suddenly discover that you've got a left field business requirement that no one knew about that you have to meet. High waterfall, meet Agile. This is kind of what it went like. Kate, it's really exciting. Spark's decided that we're not going to be Agile, not going to be waterfall anymore. We're going to use Agile. It's really exciting. You get to do all the design, all the implementation, everything, and it's all about you, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, the transition from waterfall to Agile wasn't exactly easy for me and probably for other people in Spark. It was a major change in how we do things. It was a concept. Agile was a concept that we'd been told about, and it was going to be the best thing since sliced bread. But for me, I was kind of overwhelmed by the magnitude of the change. I was a BAU engineer. I did the watering and feeding of the Exchange infrastructure. All I knew was waterfall. Projects get done and they get handed over to me to look after. And I saw all the project managers and all the change managers and the designers all being let go. And I did actually get the idea that I would have to do everything. I was overwhelmed by the thought that I would be doing the business cases, the design, the implementation, the migrations, everything, all by myself. Fortunately, GD and Siddharth Kumar, who's not unfortunately here today, had a slightly more accurate idea of what Agile was. And I distinctly remember the day when GD called me into a meeting room and I thought, oh my God, he's going to fire me. No, he didn't fire me. What he said was, Sid wants 30 mailboxes in the cloud by the 20th of June. That's 30 mailboxes in the cloud in 15 days. And I looked at him.
She really did.
Yeah.
I could have, if looks could kill, I would have been dead at that point.
But then I looked at actually what he was drawing on the whiteboard. And what he was drawing on the whiteboard was what we needed to do to get those 30 mailboxes in the cloud in 15 days. And I got it. I got the idea of Agile. That was my first lesson in Agile, work in small iterations. And I was up for that challenge. 30 mailboxes in the cloud in 15 days, no worries. So we went from trying to deliver all of those requirements down to the specific requirements that we needed for that iteration. So let's talk about how we actually did that. So our challenge, 15 mailboxes in the cloud in 15 days. So it's basically a proof of concept in production. We can focus exactly on what we needed to do. So what could we take out of our original design? Well, we didn't need Exchange 2013 ready on-prem. We didn't need to have the databases, the DAG, backups, monitoring, because we weren't going to be moving mailboxes from 2007 to 2013. We'd get rid of that. We didn't need a decision from the business about where those mailboxes needed to go, and we didn't need a strategy on how to get them there. We decided ISA could live another day and continue to proxy our Outlook traffic. We decided, even though it was in our original design, we wouldn't transfer our mail flow to EOP. We would keep our internet mail flow on our on-premise appliances. And we didn't need to do any RBAC, any help desk setup, any support processes. So how did we get? What did we need to do to get those mailboxes in the cloud? So the first thing I should say is we weren't starting from a completely blank slate. We did have a tenant in place, and our newly created Agile Sprint office was using Project Online. So we had federation and we had DirSync enabled, so we were starting from that. And as well, we did have a third party engaged to help us with some design work and to help us with the migrations. So what do we need to do to get those 30 mailboxes up to the cloud? Well, the first thing we needed to acknowledge and the business needed to take on board is that there were risks of doing what we were doing. We're actually going to touch all of the mailboxes in our 2007 environment. ActiveSync in particular, the URL was changing. And as soon as we got mailboxes onto the cloud, we had mail flow going through our 2013 environment. So the business needs to know there's some things that we may not be able to mitigate. So the first thing we needed to do was enable coexistence between our 2007 environment and our 2013 environment, because you can't migrate directly from 2007 to the cloud. So we had to install Exchange into our environment. We had 4 servers in our design, but we just did 2. We already had our schema updates done, and we installed an Exchange server in 2 locations because we had geo redundancy for the first time. We needed namespaces and an SSL certificate. So we needed our namespaces for our 2013 environment, for OWA, for ActiveSync, and for AutoDiscover. And we needed an SSL certificate purchased, a SANCert purchased and installed on our Exchange servers. We needed basic load balancing installed because we did want to deliver the requirement of having geo redundancy across our 2 data centres. But it was really basic. It was actually, for the first time, we were using DNS load balancing instead of our F5s, but it was very basic configuration. We just used round robin for determining the location and only monitored one virtual directory. ISA couldn't cope with 2013, so we did actually have to have another reverse proxy server. But the good news is that the Microsoft Web Application Proxy is already part of your ADFS infrastructure, so we were able to leverage that already. So once we had all those things in place, coexistence. We enabled coexistence between 2007 and 2013. Once we'd completed that, we needed to have a second deployment, a second federation between our on-prem Exchange and Exchange Online. So we needed IP addresses, we needed firewall changes made, and we needed the hybrid configuration wizard runs successfully, which does all that really important back-end work that enables FreeBusy between the two organisations, and it creates the address books, it adds all the Microsoft addresses to all your mailboxes, and a whole lot of other stuff behind the scenes. So that's all we actually needed to get our 30 mailboxes up in the cloud in 15 days.
So did we actually do it in 15 days, Kate?
Technically, no. It was actually 21 days, but
21 days, that's still like, it would have taken us months and months and months to do the same thing previously.
oh, in Waterfall, we'd probably still be still making up our minds about what we were going to do.
Yeah, cool. So how did we go fast? I want to say that first off, Agile is a framework, so you can either dive wholly into it or you can kind of dip your toes in, and we weren't fully Agile when we first started sprinting. We kind of tried to be as Agile as we could, and we did a whole lot of the stuff that's now led to where we are today, where we are fully Agile. What we did, we set up what we called our War and Peace room. So this was basically a project room. What we did is that enabled us to have all our resources who were working on it collaborating really closely together, which is really important. We used a small core team. There was about 6 people, and we brought in other resources for parts of sprints as we needed them, network guys, firewall guys, load balancing guys.
And we did a really radical thing. Instead of the waterfall, one designer emails their design, it goes to the next person, then they approve it, it might go back, and then it goes around and round and round and round. We cut all that out. We actually just got everybody in the room and we talked to each other. We thrashed out the designs that we needed for all of our mail flow, for our client configurations, for our reverse proxy, all in a couple of days using whiteboards, using Microsoft's Office Lens to take the photos, pop them into PowerPoint. That was our documentation.
So a lot of our artifacts for our design work are actually photos of whiteboards. We worked in small iterations, which are called sprints in the Agile world, with a focus on just what you need to get done in that 2-week period. So you sit down and you work through the massive list of stuff you need to do by priority, and you go, what can we get done in the next 2 weeks? And you make it happen. And you fail fast. What that means in this is not that it's a dismal failure, but because you're working a 2-week iteration, if things go wrong, that's not a bad thing, and it means you're not bound by having to have all the answers before you start.
Which I have an example of how we failed fast. We focused on getting coexistence between 2007 and 2013 sorted, because that's, if we had any issues, that's who we would be impacting our end users. So we were actually a little bit vague about exactly how we were going to run the hybrid configuration wizard. So the first time we ran it without centralised mail flow. So that meant that internal users on cloud sending to on-prem, their emails actually went right round the internet and came back in, which wasn't what we wanted. So second time, we ran using centralised mail flow, so that would mean we had mail flow between, with the mail connector between our online Exchange servers and our on-prem Exchange servers. And so we needed a smart host because we couldn't just put a VIP, publish a VIP to the internet, because we were using DNS load balancing. So we used the DNS entry for our 2013 environment, and that worked really well, prem to cloud. But cloud to prem hit our reverse proxy servers, and that doesn't work, and it's certainly not a supported configuration. Do not do that at home. So third time, we clicked on the third time, we had to do a major design on the fly. We had to get the firewall people back in, the load balancing people back in, to design a completely separate connection going from Exchange Online to on-prem to allow the mail flow to work. We ran the hybrid configuration again. Third time lucky, we had success. We got the TLS sessions connected between the 2 Exchange servers essentially, and we had mail flow working. So that's some of the things that we did to go fast in our first phase, getting those 30 mailboxes up into the cloud in 15 days. But clearly the business, and especially Sid, was not going to let us rest on our laurels. He wanted us now to get all the mailboxes up into the cloud. One way that we sped up our migrations was to use parallel work streams. So we built out our infrastructure that we had not done in our first phase while we were working out actually how were we going to migrate our users. And that meant that we did a number of configurations. We configured our load balancing properly. We installed Exchange onto all of our servers, configured monitoring and backups, which is always a good thing to do. And we configured the client settings on Exchange Online. So things like retention settings, archiving settings were all done for Exchange Online. We looked at how we were going to migrate our users. We were still waiting for the business to tell us who could go to the cloud and who had to stay on-prem. And in a waterfall scenario, that may have stopped us because, you know, you've got to consult, you've got to make decisions, everyone has to wait. But because we were in an agile framework, we didn't need to wait. We could just carry on with trying to migrate as many pilot users as we could find. So these were often people from our own technical floor. And as soon as they found out about 50 gig mailboxes, we didn't have any problem finding people. They were really keen to move to the cloud. So we were able to do our refine our migration strategy on them. Another way that we were able to go fast is to use the flexible and inclusive team. So we've talked about how we brought in the load balancing team and the firewall team. Well, in this phase, we brought in our service desk team and our end user provisioning team, because they were actually the ones who were going to lead our migration for us. And this has a couple of really good benefits for going fast. The first thing is that it is a knowledge sharing. It's a seamless knowledge sharing, because as soon as we started migrating users, our service desk people were with us, and sorry, I'll just take a glass of water. Our service desk people were with us in the room, so as soon as we had any issues, they were there working with us. We didn't have that waterfall scenario of project team does all the work, works it all out, and then hands over to the service desk in a training some months later. It was absolutely seamless. And they could then do any documentation that they needed and pass on the information that they needed during their heartbeats. So a really effective strategy. And we actually didn't do any documentation at all, which is...
Not that we didn't do any documentation, we just didn't write it. So the actual guys who were using it wrote the documentation that was fit for their needs and their purpose, and just the right amount.
And the other thing that was really useful about having our service desk and our end user provisioning team running the migration and being with us in the room was that they actually were the experts about our end users. They were on the coalface, they knew all the business units, how that all worked. They already had communication strategies in place and they knew how to use them. So they were really, really valuable in that sense. And they also had really useful ideas about how we were going to do the migration. And they were marvels at Excel, which was actually a really key part of our migration strategy. So another way that we went fast was to be quite manual in the way that we did our migrations. We didn't do a lot of automation trying to find all our users, writing WYSI PowerShell scripts to try and locate our batches. We actually just dumped out of AD and out of Exchange into Excel, and that's where the Excel script skills came in. Lots of VLOOKUPs to find our migration users. So we had a three-phase process. We had to identify those users who were going to the cloud, we had to validate them, and then actually do the manual process after hours. And this is where our third-party partner came in. They were able to do those migrations out of hours for us. So let's have a look in a bit more detail at some of the issues that we had. When you're identifying users, you probably know this already, but your shared mailboxes and those users who are using those shared mailboxes have to go to the cloud at the same time. And the same thing for delegates and managers. They have to go to the cloud at the same time. Having them across two locations doesn't work, as we discovered, and it's not supported by Microsoft.
We did try it just to see, and it really doesn't work.
Trust us on that. So one of the issues is actually finding out those managers and those delegates. So you can dump out of send on behalf of, gives you some delegate permissions. Resource delegates field also gives you some permissions in 2007. But there is one, when people assign the delegates permission in Outlook, that in 2007 you can't interrogate from Active Directory or Exchange 2007. It's actually a mailbox attribute.
That's what most people do too.
Yeah. So we had an issue of, okay, how are we going to find, and we didn't want to log into everybody's mailboxes to have a look at this. That's not the agile way. So the agile way, in our case, was to leverage the scripting skills that we had within the infrastructure team. Craig Hughes is an absolute whiz at VB and at PowerShell, and he was able to write a VB script that goes in to the free busy folder inside the mailbox, and grab the attribute and output that into a CSV, which went back into our master migration Excel spreadsheet and dumped out our migration batch. So if anybody wants that VB script, happy to pass that on.
It only works on Exchange 2007.
So once we had our migration batches, our migration process was relatively, as I said, quite manual. Large migration batch of 250 users a day, well, a night. It would go off to the offshore team. They would divide them up into smaller batches. They would run a small PowerShell script to do the licensing, and then they would use the migration wizard and Exchange Online console to do the migrations themselves. Very straightforward, very reliable way of doing that. Because they were doing that overnight, they could do the syncing and the completion, send a text to the end user, and of course we were fresh every morning to come in and deal with any issues during the day. So once we'd completed our migrations on cloud, well, not completed, we were getting into a really good rhythm about how we were doing it, we did finally get that decision from the business, which was about who had to stay on-prem and who was going to the cloud. And that meant finally we could actually size our database availability group and size our databases on-prem. So I'm just going to briefly give you an overview of what we did to migrate our mailboxes from 2007 to 2013. And this illustrates two things we've been talking about today in terms of Agile, in terms of how operations owns the design and the implementation, and also how we need to be reactive and respond to change. So this is a very, very detailed, highly crafted design spec that I have kept for posterity and to embarrass GD, who happens to be the author of it.
Yeah, I really can't believe that you actually kept that and it made it into our deck. Yeah. Mortified. At least it's not on a napkin. It's one thing. It actually was in a notepad.
It was notepad. But actually, it does actually tell us all we needed to know at a high level about what our design was going to be for 2013. We had a single DAG, but it was going to be across two data centres, a primary data centre and a secondary data centre. We were going to be active passive, so we needed some sort of manual failover between our active databases and our databases on the secondary data centre. And we had resiliency within our data centre, 2 servers with active copies on those servers. And we had a lagged copy in our bottom right corner for the situation. Because we were using Exchange native protection, we needed the ability to be able to go back in time if we had any corruptions on our active copies. So that's what we knew we were going to do.
That was a great plan.
Great plan. It was a brilliant plan. We're very excited to be doing it. So how did we go ahead and do this? Well, as is typical, once the business had made the decision about where things were going, they wanted us to do it immediately. So we had to do our entire setup of our Exchange server in 2013 from scratch to ready to go in 2 weeks. So we were actually in a full agile sprint by this point. So we went through 3 phases of we worked out what we needed to do. So that was getting our task list. We carried out our task list, we did our design, and we implemented, and we did our configuring. So the first thing you needed to do, of course, is to design your storage, and you can't go past the Microsoft Storage Catalog, a storage calculator.
It's a giant spreadsheet, which is really, really helpful and quite straightforward.
We also, so this is how we set up our, to enable the failover between the two data centres. We use the data centre activation mode with DAG only. We enabled our activation preferences so that our primary data centre had the active databases. We enabled our lag copy, and we prevented our passive data centre from becoming active by using the database copy auto activation policy intrasite only. So that was all good. We designed, configured, installed, tested, and there just seemed to be a few issues. The first issue was it was a really manual, complicated failover between active and passive. It was something that the third level engineer would have to do. It wasn't something that we could give to our 24/7 team and say, oh, go for it. So that would essentially mean we would have an extended outage if we actually needed to fail over. So that was a real problem. The other problem that we had was the database, the servers in our primary data centre actually couldn't hold all of the databases at one go. They couldn't hold all 4 at the same time, which is a major problem if you want to do any maintenance or any patching on your servers. So under Waterfall, we would have whinged, I think, and moaned about the scenario that we'd been given. We might have complained to our designer, but we wouldn't have made the changes to the config because that's not what you do. You raise another project that would go in and make the config. But because Ops owns it, we were able to make those changes. We talked to our architect, he agreed, and we made the changes to go to an active-active configuration rather than installing more servers and having more servers in our active data centre.
It was a pretty aggressive, long debate. It went something like, hey, can we have active-active in both data centres? And I went, yes.
Pretty much. So we were able to, so that's the configuration that we ended up with, and we'd completed all the other things that we needed to do to get 2013 ready and started migrating our mailboxes. And one of the things we discovered really quite early on was our service desk started reporting some issues. They reported that some of the stuff they're used to doing in the 2007 console wasn't available on-prem in the 2013 console. So things like send on behalf of, at the time, could not be, those permissions could not be given in the GUI, in the EAC. And so that was a slight dilemma for us because we didn't want to have to create an RBAC. We didn't want to spend the time to create an RBAC. We didn't want to give them PowerShell, the PowerShell to be able to run the set mailbox command. And so we had to come up with another solution. And being agile, we did come up with we came up with a GUI using PowerShell. Again, we were able to leverage the skills of Craig Hughes. He was able to create a PowerShell form, and I'm just going to demo that.
So while Kate's getting herself set up and making sure that everything works, and that she can log in and do all that stuff, this is the bit where I get to talk about the fact that you've seen that Kate as an Exchange admin knows all about the GUI. She's pretty confident with PowerShell, and as she's about to show us now, this is where Agile means that administrators and infrastructure people suddenly can become developers as well and bring some real value to the business with the skills that they have.
So what I'm going to show you today is actually how to add an alias to a mailbox, because you can't do that, a cloud mailbox, you can't do that from on-prem inside the GUI either. You have to use the set remote mailbox. So what we're going to be doing is using the System Windows form class in .NET. And if anybody's tried to do it in natively in PowerShell, they'll know it's really, really painful. You've got to make little tweaks to your code, save it, look at your GUI, every time you move an object in your form. Very, very painful. So Craig didn't use that. he used a third-party tool that does a lot of that really manual stuff for you. Happens to be Sapient PowerShell Studio. So let's have a quick look at how we do that. So we just create a new form. A little bit slow. That, see it? So we'll create an empty form and select it. Nice looking form. First thing we want to do is get rid of these closes, because what we want to do is we want the users to connect with the PS session to the Exchange server, run their connect alias, change their alias and then disconnect. We don't want them just to click on the X button at the top. So let's go and turn that off. Just down here, we'll turn that off here. And away it goes. So now we just need to very simply pull across our buttons. We need one to connect, one to change the alias, and then one to disconnect. And we need some way of inputting the information, so we need a text box for the mailbox name.
Have you ever noticed that your ability to type is inversely proportional to the number of people watching you?
And another text box for the alias, and then we need some results pane. So let's do that. A rich text box, okay.
That's why Kate's doing the demo and not me.
Well, something went wrong there. Let me go and get that again. Okay, our rich text box. So that's our basic form. I don't know what that is doing there. Not very meaningful for the end user. So the first thing we needed to do would be to change these items so they actually say something meaningful, which we do on the right-hand side here. We just change the text. And there we go. And it changes in the middle there. So rather than you watch me do this, I have prepared something earlier which shows the form with the labels and all our buttons. But it still doesn't do anything. You can click on the button and nothing will happen. So you have to connect the event, which is the button click, with some PowerShell script in the back end. And this does it very nicely for us. It creates a variable here, the button connect click, that you then put in your PowerShell code to actually do the PS session. So we can come and do this. What I'm going to do is create it as a function and then just copy the function code. So I'll just do that now. And let's go over there. Paste it in there. And then take down to our connect button. And that's the same thing we do for all of the parts of the form that we're creating. So let's have a look at our change alias. So this is the meat of the form where the button is clicked to say change the alias. The results field are cleared. We create a variable with the text of our primary SMTP that we've inputted, the user has inputted. We set the remote mailbox. We do an update. That set remote mailbox is using the new alias text, grabbed from the text box, and then we output it. So let's see if it's going to work. Now the good news about this particular tool is that you can actually export it as, create a executable, which is really handy. In our environment we use Citrix, so we can actually deploy that, we can publish this to Citrix. So it's another layer of security, keeping your end users away from the PowerShell code. So let's click on it
and also removing their rights to do administrative functions while leaving them as non-admins, which is kind of cool. Hopefully that's going to do something. There we go.
Yay. Okay, first thing. So let me type in before I type anything in, let me connect. So this is our minimal viable solution. We don't have any validation to say yes, we've connected or not. So let's just keep fingers crossed that we have connected. my next iteration will obviously have that validation in it. So EOL test 01 at Spark, and let's create a new alias, Ignite, EOL test 01. Okay, let's click on the change alias, and yes, we have changed our alias. So let's disconnect and close. So that's a really, really useful application to use to help you really get going with making stuff available to your service desk that you don't want them to have the PowerShell, but they can use the forms.
Cool. So now we're going to give you some tech tips that will help you sleep better at night during your migration. And you'll see that in this case, it's a fat, happy, sleepy cat, not a dead one that we're delivering. So one of the things that will really help you, deploy Click to Run Office. That is the version of Office that you download from Office 365. Now, you want to keep it up to date because that's also really helpful. There's lots of iterations constantly coming from Microsoft. And if you turn on automatic updates, it'll download everything at random intervals on every machine in your organization. So here is a link to a blog about how to switch that so that it gets its updates from a local file server on your network. And that's really helpful because it means you can control the updates when they get released, how they do it. You can also set up a second update because it's just a registry key that sets that location. And you can have a pilot group of people who try out those patched versions of Office before you deploy it to everybody. ADFS, as Kate said, we'd already deployed ADFS for Project Online, but in an enterprise level scale, it's really, really helpful because it makes your change management with your customers much simpler. What this meant for us is that people could just click straight on things and log in. It also gives you a bunch of other wonderful single sign-on features like the ability to go straight to salesforce.com or other things like that. Most of this functionality is now available in AD Connect or Azure AD Connect, but this is definitely something to consider if you're working at enterprise level. Client proxies. So you heard Kate say that ISA lived another day at Spark. Well, it did until we got about halfway through our migrations. And then the fact that every time Outlook starts and it opens up to 8 connections to Office 365, it killed our proxies. And we ended up implementing a dedicated set of proxy servers just to handle the Office 365 traffic. They're still in place today. They're still working. So even if you've got terabytes of internet bandwidth, you need to have a think about what it's going to be like on your proxy servers. And finally, internet usage. So there are calculators from Microsoft on internet usage. It's kind of a black arcane art, and they're complicated, and it's not easy to predict what that looks like. You might be able to do it for one service. As soon as you start going, we'll turn SharePoint on, or Yammer, or anything else which happens really fast when you start going to the cloud. You've got no idea what your internet usage is going to be. So I recommend that throughout your project you set checkpoints when you're going to see how you're going, because you really don't want to end up thinking that you're going great guns to suddenly find that no one can surf the Herald or check out TradeMe at your office because the internet's run out of bandwidth.
Hybrid Configuration Wizard. It's my friend. Whoops, it's my friend. Should be your friend too. We've run it a number of times, and this Microsoft have put a lot of development work into making it reliable and really easy to troubleshoot if you do have any issues. And that's a really good blog which explains all the work that's gone into it. The Express Route is also something to think about. This is a connection between your data centre and Microsoft's for your Office 365 traffic instead of going through the internet. It took us a few iterations to get it to work, but we did see a quantifiable reduction in latency, especially for shared mailboxes, because they're the ones that are online. But also our delegates and managers were much happier because those calendars worked much more promptly than they did before we turned on the Express Route.
So if you are going to do Express Route or even considering it, I really strongly advise you to find a partner to talk to or talk to your Microsoft account representative.
So we'd just like to wrap up our session today just by going through the summaries, the benefits of Agile. So definitely faster and cheaper for doing your Exchange deployment. We configured Exchange Hybrid and migrated 11,000 mailboxes in 5 months, compared to 3 years of not doing very much at all. But it also has other benefits. It is enabling. It allowed us to go forward in the face of uncertainty. It's empowering. We controlled the pace of the migrations. We had a third party who was involved with all of our design and migrations, but they were part of our team. They had to work under the Agile framework and throw away their usual methods of engagement.
So they sat in with our small team of people in our War and Peace room and everyone worked together.
And it's also enriching because you've got the support people, you've got the BAU engineers right there from the start of the project until the end. So that knowledge is built up by those who are supporting the system.
Cool. So you really can rapidly deploy Exchange Hybrid. It's really possible. It's not a fictitious thing thrown at you by Microsoft where they start talking about, highways to onboarding and stuff. You really can do it. You just have to think a little bit differently about what you're doing. Agile really changed our world at Spark, our infrastructure team. You've heard Kate talking about all those great things, and that's from her as an end user of it, not me as a manager telling people how great it is. And we keep using Agile at Spark. In my teams, I now have 3 Agile backlogs running, which really makes a big difference to us. So now's the time when you get to ask us any questions that you have, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. Yeah, down the back.
So did you supplement the Exchange Online security protection with the services?
Yeah, so we were already running originally some hybrid appliances, dedicated appliances for hygiene, and in the last couple of months, Kate's done a whole lot of work to move all the rules that we'd created in that environment over to EOL, and now we've basically decommissioned those appliances. If you've got any other questions, because it doesn't seem like there's much here, feel free to come and talk to us afterwards. Our email addresses are on the slide. Ping us a note. We're more than happy to talk. Please evaluate our session. We'd love to hear what you thought of what we did, and it will help us, and you might win a cool prize, so that'd be cool. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us.